Like most people would lead with the personal note of like, I'm just really passionate about what you guys are doing and I'm super excited to that's my trigger phrase. I'm super excited to be a part of XYZ or learn about XYZ. That's a trigger to me as an employer because I don't want to pay you to learn. I am assuming you're applying to this because you have something to give in a capacity that I don't have. Yay! Today we get to continue with our interview series with an episode on, you guessed it, the most commonly most commonly asked behavioral questions in interviews and how we recommend answering them, especially some of those that are more tricky. So we're going to give you the rundown of the full list of questions we hear that are most commonly asked. And then for a few of those that we see giving interview candidates a little bit more angst, we're going to give you some examples and some frameworks on how to answer those. Audrey, how's it going? You ready?
Oh, good. Yeah, I'm excited because I think that when it comes to behavioral questions, people sometimes think you can't prepare for them because you don't know what they're going to be. But like you said, these are the most, wrong. These are the most common ones that we see. So if you prepare for these, then you will be well prepared for any behavioral question that's going to come for you. Come for you.
Come for you. I mean, that is how it feels sometimes. I'm like, they were trying to come at my life.
Yeah.
Questions.
Tell me about your greatest weekness.
Yeah. How was the third grade for you? What were some of your most embarrassing moments? I'm like, relevant to the job? Question mark. So how about this? Want to like give the rundown of what these questions are, and then we could go case by case on how to answer them.
So interview questions typically come in two different types of questions. So why do you want this? Or why are you the person for this role? That's one type. And the other type
Sell
of
me
question.
On it.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
the one that we all love. Right. And then the dreaded, I don't mean to be so negative about this, but we're going to switch it to a positive because we're going to give you guys all of the tips to feel really confident about your answers. But a lot of times we are dreading the whole tell me about a time you blank. And we're going to help you not dread it in the future or right now. So the why do you want this or why we should hire you, basically, selling yourself in that statement. That's your opportunity to really articulate your motivations and the specific value proposition that you have for this job and why you're the person for the job, to put it simply. So to answer that, you're going to want to reflect back on your interests and your passions and talents and abilities and everything that you feel led you to this job and why you feel drawn to apply for this position, and describe those in terms of how you're deeply motivated to serve this company. Mm-hmm. That's really important. Kelsey, I know you're really passionate about that. So do you want to touch on why it's important to talk about why you want to serve the company and not talk about what you're looking to get from the company?
Yes. I have interviewed a good number of people for various positions I've hired for over the years, and there is a marked difference between candidates who fall into the trap of thinking an interviewer just wants to hear that you're super excited and very passionate about what they're doing versus those that understand that an employer is hiring you and paying either their personal hard-earned dollars if it's a small company or like our small business, or allocating a precious part of the budget to exchange those dollars for you relieving something off their heavy burden or their like overloaded plate. And so you are there to solve a problem and serve, and they have a felt need that is a very compelling reason as to why they're going through a difficult and expensive process to add one more person to their payroll. And that's how I like to think about it coming in as a candidate of, I need to understand what is bothering them the most having this position yet to be filled. Mm-hmm. Why are they hiring for this role? What are they looking for me to add in terms of saved time, saved money, additional revenue, additional capacity for new projects, to make sure that maybe somebody isn't going to quit because they're doing accidentally two people's jobs. Who needs me the most, and what am I solving for? And if you have an understanding of how you are adding to that bottom line, then the most important thing to do is answer this question with that understanding explicitly stated up front. So I love to answer questions about why are you the person for the job? Basically, as listen, like I would literally say something like, we both know that without it, let's say it's a project management position, without a timely, effective, clear communicator, deadline driven project manager, everything goes wrong. Not to be disrespectful to all the functional experts on the team, but seriously, if people aren't coordinating, it's not working. And soon enough, the leadership in the company is going to be like, what the heck? We're over budget and past time. And so that, oh my gosh, my cat loves water. This is the second time today that she has stuck her hand in her water bowl and then flicked all of it out onto the floor and then acted like it's a bird bath. She's so freaking weird. And then earlier she took my entire glass of water and just goes up to the edge of the counter and in one swoop flings it off the counter and it dumps everywhere. Cats. Anyway, so listen, the thing about project management is sometimes it feels like herding cats. Let's get back to the point. And
amazing.
So that's why I'm here and then I would list the 3 key priorities that I remember them listing in the job description, like to run your SAP implementation with a technical understanding of XYZ methodology, like that they mentioned in the job description was really important. So you can, and then reiterate the benefit to them. And then you could close with some personal note, which most of the time people lead with, which drives me nuts. Like most people would lead with the personal note of like, I'm just really passionate about what you guys are doing. And I'm super excited that's my trigger phrase. I'm super excited to be a part of XYZ or learn about XYZ. That's a trigger to me as an employer because I don't want to pay you to learn. I am assuming you're applying to this because you have something to give in a capacity that I don't have. Mm-hmm. Like you're fulfilling a capacity that I can't even teach it because I don't have it, and that's why I'm hiring you. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like that's kind of a blind spot for a lot of folks. And so the last thing is what I'm saying that you could close with is the personal sentiment. And you could say not only all of this, but, let's say there's some ed tech company that's like, I don't know, has some core value. Let's say not only for all these reasons, but also because my personal motivations as somebody who was funded by blah, blah, like capability that your company, I don't know, enabled, like a personal tie-in to why you care about what they're doing. And so those are all the reasons that I feel I'm confidently the person to contribute to this project and do the job exceptionally well. And I would just not really have any buts about it, Like if you don't think you're the person for the job, maybe throughout the interview you'll get to, if you don't think you're the person for the job, maybe you need to upskill before getting into the interview, or it's because you're unclear about if you really understand what the company's doing or you like them or whatever. So maybe before you get to the key selling point, you will have done some informational interviews with people that work there before your interview with the hiring manager, or you will have asked the recruiter in the screening a couple questions that you needed to give you the confidence that you really want this and you have the energy and the mental reserve to really have a strong pitch. Because if there's things stopping you from confidently giving a strong pitch, figure out what you need to resolve that.
Mic drop. I
hope that's not stressful. I just think it's the truth.
No, and what was really impactful about what you were saying, actually, I mean, everything you said was so good and so contrary to what most people do in interviews, as you were saying. But I found myself nodding alongside you when you were saying, we all know that without a project manager, XYZ happens. So that's a really good tip to take moving forward for everybody listening. Find a way to uh, share a truth about that job and to get them nodding along with you. And subconsciously, when they're nodding with you and agreeing with you, they're going to be liking you as well. And that's a really just powerful communication tip in general. But it was so clear in what Kelsey was saying. You can go back and watch the video and see me nodding along. Like, I want to hire her.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. So that is the first type of question that you are going to get. You are going to get that, so make sure you prepare it. The second type of question is a tell me about a time question. So that gives you the opportunity to bring up really strong examples from your past work that you've done, your past job, that can serve as a predictor of your future success at this company. So you need to, in order to answer those, you need to reflect on the diversity of your experiences, both the positive and the negative, and we'll go through that in the examples below. And reflect through those and practice running through them in the SAR framework that we talked about last week. If you want to go back and listen to that episode again, practice it through the SAR framework so that you are really confident about sharing those in a concise way and in a way that demonstrates you're the person for this job through those tell me about a time questions. So those are the two different variations of questions that you're going to get. The questions that we're going to go through today are the tell me about yourself question, which we have even more to talk about in terms of that, the whole selling yourself. And we're also going to talk about why you are leaving your current position. Actually, we're not going to talk about that today. We're actually going to save that for an entire episode on its own because we have so much.
That was a little plot twist right as we were preparing for this episode. We're like, wait. That should be its own episode. Answering questions about why you left your last job or why you've been unemployed or something sticky like that. So stay tuned. But that is technically a commonly asked question. So we just wanted to bring that to your awareness now, and then stay tuned for the other episode.
Mm-hmm. And then we're also going to be talking today about what are your strengths and weaknesses. I know the weaknesses always trips people up. And we all want to say that our weakness is perfection, right? That's like the joke. But we'll give you some other options to say as well. And then tell me about a difficult situation and how you overcame it. Tell me about a time when you exceeded your customer, client, boss, whoever, exceeded their expectations. Tell me about a time when you had to carry out a task without much instruction and how you handled that. And then tell me about a time you failed or made a mistake and how you dealt with it. So if any of those pique your interest, be sure to keep listening because we're going to dive into each of them and how you can best handle that. Anything to say, Kelsey, before we jump into tell me about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you've been in some interviews recently and you've thought, oh, well, they actually didn't ask me technically any of these questions specifically. The thing is, you either will at some point, or the other benefit to you by preparing through all of these questions is if you hand write out a response to each of these questions, I can almost guarantee you will find some unique question that they bring up in the interview that matches one of the responses that you created. I don't think that any of your prepared responses and scenarios and especially the tell me about a time scenarios, they're either in the bucket of tell me about a great time where you basically made something really successful, or tell me a bad time where you were dealing with really difficult people, impossible circumstances, or it was your problem that you created. And you will never ever regret preparing a scenario answer for any of those. You will use it regardless of the difference in the way the question is phrased. I've done this myself. One of the last times that I was in a formal job interview, I did this and I went to a Jason's Deli. I don't know why. I really getting work done in a Jason's Deli. It's so weird. But it's probably the unlimited ice cream and their little gingerbread things, but it's very underrated. Anyway, so I remember instead of typing out my answers, I wrote them out, and it encodes it into your memory much more viscerally and strongly, and you're much more likely to have a more confident recall in the interview. So I always recommend handwritten, way more effective than typing. You could prepare it typed, but then write it out at some point before the interview. And they ended up not asking any of the specific, they didn't phrase any of their questions in the way I predicted, but I literally used every single example, and I was ready for anything.
Yeah.
So I
It
want to
reminds
encourage you in
me,
that.
it reminds me of math classes in college when you were allowed to have a cheat sheet, but you never actually used the cheat sheet because you just memorized everything that was on the cheat sheet because you spent the time writing it out.
No, I actually can't relate. I definitely did use the cheat sheet. I had this one supply chain management class that was like senior level, and the final average grade, or the average grade on the final, was a 35%. And you could bring in your own cheat sheet with any formula that we talked about throughout the entire semester. And I remember getting into the exam and I was like, all of these are useless. What is this question?
No.
I think I got like a 50 or something, though, which made me feel like a genius. Anyway, let's go. What's the first question that you want to cover?
We're going to talk about the tell me about yourself question that I think a lot of people avoid preparing for because they think that they can wing it, which is a common thing that we're talking about with a lot of these questions. Just don't wing it. Don't wing it. Tell me about yourself. Spend a little time, write this out. Your pitch, this is your opportunity to share your pitch. And your pitch is going to be made up of 3 different components. Those components being destination, backstory, and then connecting the dots. Destination is just about where you're headed. So really the role that you aspire to have and the vision and passion for that role. So then that's your destination. Start up with that. Backstory is your brief backstory of relevant career highlights and experiences that describe your desire and your fit for this new role. And so that's your backstory. And then connecting the dots, you're basically just saying, here's why those highlights have made me passionate and equipped to exceed the expectations for this role.
Yeah, exactly. And most people, this is a really important framework because most people go backstory, connect the dots. And so that's why I'm here. But technically, people have already tuned out because the way that you need to speak in effective credibility and rapport building language is, look, I'm immediately relevant and I'm talking about exactly what you want. Here's where I'm coming from, though. But again, let me go back to connecting the dots. And so, especially if you're a career pivoter, that's like, yeah, I backstory. So I was a liberal arts major. But then I thought it would be, blah, blah. I like ran into this person and I listened to this interesting speech, and it really got me onto the idea of being in tech consulting. And so that's why I'm here today. And I love what y'all are doing. And, I've done XYZ thing that makes me kind of credible, maybe. And so that's why I'm a good fit for this position. That was so boring. They already cataloged a few dings against your credibility by saying that. Instead, you need to be like, the reason I am devoting this part of my career for this foreseeable future to tech consulting is because I believe in blah, blah. I could spend all day doing XYZ task that's relevant to the position. And so when I majored in that liberal arts degree, I realized I had been doing that all along by developing my critical thinking, consuming large amounts of information, distilling it. And so that's why I'm here today. And that just made you so much more credible by doing for future, why you're here, quick backstory, connect the dots again as to solidify why you're here and why you're the person for the job. Again, don't do what most people do, which is like way back and people are already spending precious seconds thinking, why are we listening to this? backstory, connect the dots so that's why you're headed where you're headed.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. And then you've really got their attention. So
Always.
awesome.
It's always about getting that attention.
Yes, and keeping it. So that's the first. Tell me about yourself. And then if you remember, the second question we talked about is why are you leaving your current position? But we have a whole episode coming out about that. So stay tuned. But for now, we're going to talk about what are your strengths and weaknesses. Big sigh.
Anytime that this is asked, I'm like, bro, really? Come on.
Yeah.
Would you want to be asked in an interview about your weaknesses? Like, get out of town. Get out of town. But sometimes this is still asked. And either way, even if you, by the grace of the Lord, are not asked directly about like, what are your strengths and your weaknesses, blah, blah. Again, the understanding of both is you, especially like if you delve into a struggle or a weakness and balancing that with an understanding of your strengths, you'll be able to navigate harder situational questions that come up about like, tell me about a time where you failed. That might have to do with a weakness that you spent time preparing an answer for. So again, even if you're not asked directly, this is important. So how would you, Audrey, go about like answering? I feel like answering questions about strengths are really helpful and kind of straightforward, but can we talk about the weaknesses? Because I find that's way more difficult and non-obvious how to answer.
Yeah. So the most important thing about the weaknesses is to pick actual weaknesses you have. So genuinely pick two weaknesses that you have. And we have a list of some that we're going to talk about just to kind of bring some to the surface, because I joked earlier that everyone always just wants to say perfection because they think that that's what they should say. So, but just be sure that when you do share these weaknesses, you follow up with demonstrating your understanding that to take growth in this area of weaknesses very seriously, and share some specific practices you set in place to safeguard yourself against this weakness from harming your results in the future.
Yeah, and you could even start out with something as you're answering instead of going straight into, yeah, so I'm really bad about time management or I'm super forgetful. Instead, be like, yeah, definitely. Like that's another body language thing. If you start, not all, because I think that becomes a little bit of an irritating habit. Don't say, yeah, definitely, or good question. I tend to think that's a very bad language habit to say, great question before continuing. But I think where it's coming from is a good place in terms of it actually is good in rapport building to have a micro head nod and some kind of affirmative agreement. Like, absolutely, I could share that. Or just even a simple, yes, definitely, or absolutely. That usually starts off on a positive note and gives your the person listening even a little micro rapport building dopamine hit before you go into something that was stressful for them to ask about, and they're already worried that you're going to give a very awkward question that will disqualify you when they really wanted you to work out or something. So it's stressful on both sides. So you could relieve that stress by saying, yeah, definitely. So the first thing is awareness is obviously the most important thing when talking about our weaknesses. And this is a habit that I've been very careful to develop over the years as I want to perform my absolute best. In my self-awareness journey, some of the things that I've discovered is a real need to work on my time management. So I'm not going to lie, this has really been a challenge. Sometimes I get really in like a focused tunnel vision on not the most important thing. So I've identified that in myself and have focused on like I consistently have read books on techniques like the next right thing or blah blah. You could quote some time management methodologies. And in addition to calendar blocking and efficient focus habits like whenever possible, not keeping communication or notification on my computer. And with that, I've seen a significant improvement. I really would say my struggle with this is still present, but very, very reduced. And if y'all notice anything about, I'm glad that we could talk about this, because if you notice me slipping in any of these areas, I would be honored to have a conversation about it and to improve. And that would, I think, yeah, I don't know. Audrey, what's your take on that style of answer?
No, I think that's great. And I think, first of all, the honesty, like we talked about, that comes through right away and doesn't sound like something that you think they just want to hear. So I think it's always important to be honest, and I could tell that in that answer that was coming through, and the honesty demonstrates the honest desire to move through that weakness and to grow from that weakness. And so I think that's a great approach to take in terms of flipping that into, okay, um, how do I improve on this? And welcoming them into helping you improve on that shows that you want to grow and you want to continue working on this skill and move it from a weakness into a strength eventually. And then another one that I was thinking about, or another weakness that you could bring up, because we were brainstorming a list, and just to help people listening come up with their own weaknesses potentially.
Socially acceptable weaknesses.
Yes,
list.
yes.
That's a real thing. If you Google like socially acceptable weaknesses to list in an interview, it's helpful.
Yeah. So something like being concise or lacking brevity is something that you could talk about. And a way that you could follow it up with how you're working through it is that, I find that sometimes when I'm briefing people on a project, or I am sharing my results on something, I can be too concise and lack brevity in my commentary, but I always like to make sure that I'm inviting people to ask questions. That's very important to me, so that I can understand what their priorities are that I might have skipped over or I might have missed at the end of what I've said. But also going into a conversation, I like to get an understanding of what people are looking for, so I can make sure that if I do tend to be more concise, at least I'm being concise about what they want to hear. And period. I realized at the last of that and was like, no, we're going to be concise on that. Some other ones that you can, we'll give you the weaknesses and you can think about if it relates to you, or if you relates to your own weaknesses, and think through the strengths that come through that. Something about being sensitive or taking criticism the wrong way, being disorganized, or being super technical and having a hard time with soft or more creative skills like writing or creating visuals, delegating, or being too rigid to the plan, or not spontaneous or flexible, too comfortable with risk, or the opposite of that, too scared of risk, having too high of expectations, or being too impatient. Anything else, Kelsey?
No, these stress me out. We could go on to the next
Yeah, I know. That's kind of what I was thinking too. I was like, I don't want to spend too much time on the weaknesses. It's important to acknowledge them, but let's move on. And then with the strengths, like we said, that is self-explanatory.
Yeah, I think so. So I think the next question to cover is, tell me about a difficult situation and how you overcame it. What do you think, Audrey?
Yes. So the number one thing here is to always be objective and unemotional when you're when you're explaining a difficult situation. And you also want to make sure that you're not casting a negative light on other people. And
it's way better to just fall on your own sword. Mm-hmm. Listen. But yeah, just take it. You could, with professionalism and graciousness, say, I was working with some very strong personalities. It was a very cross-functional, large team. And we know that when a lot of leaders get in the room with competing priorities, it can be difficult. So a few of the priorities that were seemingly competing were, and you could talk about the biggest clash. This is
Mm-hmm.
just an example. And I realized in that moment, this is only going to get worse if we see them as competing. And so what I did was I had a conversation with each of blah blah people, blah blah, worked it out. So you could, but I think that a some structure to the question is it goes in the SAR framework, like you were saying, situation, action, result. And so say, so the situation was, you could literally use that word to structure your answer because I think a lot of uh, interview success comes down to, are you speaking effectively? And a lot of that comes down to language strategy and structure in a way that gets people to nod their heads. So
Mm-hmm.
when you set the scene for them and make sure that you are as best as possible, making it to where there's likely a picture in their mind, they're going to like what you're saying more, especially if it's a positive picture or one that they understand or can resonate with. So you could say, so the situation was blah blah blah, so what I did was action, and what happened was result. Anyway, is there anything else that you'd like to add on
Yeah.
difficult situation and how you overcame it?
Yeah. And it's exactly what you did in your example, in that the how you overcame it part. It's an amazing opportunity to introduce a new positive quality that you haven't had the opportunity to talk about yet, or they haven't asked you about
Strength.
yet. Yes, yes, add another thing in there. And the how you overcame it is really the most important part of the question, because you're ending on that positive note. So use that to your advantage and bring something in that you might not have talked about yet.
And I think that the examples you listed in, well, we actually have these examples that we send out to clients for this,
Mm-hmm.
preparing for this question. You could say, have you, like when you're thinking through what is a difficult circumstance or situation that I overcame, think about, have you facilitated a positive experience with what would otherwise have been an unhappy customer or an unhappy client? Have you overcome a misunderstanding with a team member? Or what about a tight deadline or yeah, something that seemed impossible in terms of project expectations, and you ended up, if not meeting it, very effectively mitigating all the downside that happens when you're out of time and over budget? Or what about handling a scathing email from maybe someone internally, like maybe a client or a boss or a team member? And that one is that's possibly the most delicate example that you could choose. But if you think you could do that professionally and that's the most helpful example that you could share, pick that one. Otherwise, I would put it at the bottom of the list because you never want to come off as blaming, like Audrey said,
Mm-hmm.
or shifting responsibility. That doesn't make it doesn't look good. So, what about, have you repaired mismatched expectations? Have you disagreed with your manager or coworkers on something and ended up patching that disagreement? Have you managed a needy customer or like a cross functional team that you're working with? Have you turned around an unperforming group, project, revenue stream? Like, have you had an underdog to, what is that, overdog success story? um, Things like that, that I hope can help jog your memory. And the next question that I want to talk about is, tell me about a time when you exceeded your customer, client, boss, whatever's expectations. So basically, tell me about a time when you exceeded a stakeholder's expectation. So especially if it's a customer or client, if that happens to be relevant to your work, that's great. Otherwise, let's say like boss or leadership. Um, and I would say this is going to uh, one where I'll just prepare you with the question and have you think of your own answer. But I think honestly, it doesn't have to be more complicated than, hopefully you have a story, think hard, use the SAR framework. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
The same goes for the question, tell me about a time when you had to carry out a task without much instruction. How did you handle it? This is possibly my favorite that I would really encourage you to prepare for, because as you prepare to answer it, I think it's such a confidence builder, because the other ones are kind of, some of them are confidence drains. Like if I'm sitting at my Jason's Deli preparing to talk about my weaknesses, I'm not feeling really great. So why we put this at the end of the list, I think, is to pick up your confidence and end on an upper. Like, tell me about a time when you totally made it happen without much instruction. How did you handle it? And I think this is possibly the most important, because you might be talking about a lot of external things, or things that are external to you when you're answering the other questions, but this one will allow you to get clear on, and therefore also the interviewer, your mental framework and decision making framework and strategies. How do you think? How do you work? How do you handle something when the situation is ambiguous? And this, I mean, as an employer, is probably one of the most important for me to ask anyway, because resourcefulness is the quality that I think makes the absolute best teammates. It really does. Like, the best contributor to any project is not necessarily, it's arguable, maybe, that they don't have to be like the best people person or the nicest or the smartest, but when they are handed like a big mess, that, and it's like, hey, your boss is on maternity leave. We actually need to give you this big account and you to handle it. And if you could have a positive attitude that says, I'm going to make this into a career making opportunity and I'm going to handle this, and I'm going to use this as a forever proof point that I can do hard things, then wow, you could keep talking about that in interviews for years to come, and it might help you get the job. So, and by the way, I also love preparing for interviews knowing that if I'm having a hard time answering any of these questions or coming up with a good example, it makes me think, all right, for the next month in my current
Mm-hmm.
job, how can I find a situation
Mm-hmm.
that I can ace and then use as an example? Because a lot of people are just, especially if you're unhappy in your job, it's very understandable to tune out a little bit, and you're just trying to check the boxes and maybe move on. But the thing is, that could hurt you. I know that it seems like a short term benefit to yourself to check out, but it's a long term harm to yourself to not collect as many metric backed achievements as you possibly can from each job. And because that, if you had like kind of a job that you thought, oh, this was just a wash this last time, most of the time your interviewers are going to want to hear you state recent examples, not just that one time you were feeling really good about your job 2 years ago. So prepare now, knowing that even if all the hour or two you spend preparing doesn't lead to you getting an offer in this very next interview, this preparation can actually just flat out help you be a more thoughtful professional. So, those are some of the reasons why I kind of believe in putting yourself in situations where, um, maybe do some interviews even when you're like, let's see, I'm not really desperate to leave. I think that
Mm-hmm.
they always make you a better professional to have to answer hard questions about yourself and sell yourself.
Absolutely. And I'm thinking about how, oh, what's that phrase? It's so simple. Like well, you can never get time back. It's not necessarily a phrase, just the truth. And if you know you're leaving your job and you're just kind of like sitting back and not using that time. It's as simple as that's time that you're never going to get back. Actually find some value in that time, knowing that you're leaving, by doing exactly what Kelsey's saying and going out and finding those situations to the best of your ability to really build up these skills and these stories to then translate in an interview, and also incorporate into who you are as an employee.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Plus, remember that the Lord is near to the brokenhearted.
Yes.
So I was just talking with my friend about like, Louise, I feel so bad, but I'm closest to the Lord when I'm going through a hard time. And when life is good, I'm like, Lord, I suck. And so if you're going through a hard time, man, it's nice to have some extra motivation to realize that the Lord is good and His grace is sufficient. I need to stop this recording before I get any more cheesy, but it's true.
Yeah. Well, and then we have one more question at the end.
Wow.
Tell me about a time. Really quick though. Tell me about a time you failed or made a mistake and how you dealt with it. This is going to be similar to the difficult situation question from earlier. And you just want to, first of all, be honest, but definitely spend more time emphasizing exactly how you corrected the situation and what you learned rather than what you did wrong. Kind of just say, okay, this is what I did wrong. And then really dig into more how you correct it, what you learned.
Thank you so much, Audrey. I'm sorry I tried to prematurely end this value.
That's
hopefully
okay.
Valuable episode to each of the listeners. So, everybody, thanks for listening.
Thanks.
And stay tuned for our next episodes, including answers to how you should talk about why you left your past position or even why you were let go.
Mm-hmm.
If you have any other specific interview advice that you really want us to cover, then please message me over on Instagram at Kelsey_thecalledcareer, or you could use the contact form over on our website, thecalledcareer.com. And we'll see you soon. Bye.
Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. To get an even more meaningful head start into your calling, head to thecalledcareer.com, where my fellow career coach Audrey and I have created a whole suite of free resources and tools to help you get clear and get a job today. For those who are definitely ready to land a job or start a business in the next 6 to 12 months, we're here to help you biblically and practically discern your calling through coaching, reflection, and deep market research. Identify the job that's aligned with it, even if you currently have no idea what you want. Rebrand your resume and LinkedIn to translate your background to appeal to your future boss. P.S. We take this off your plate and do this for you. Also, we'll teach you how to land referrals and get attention from leadership through networking. Again, if that makes you nervous, we have these emails and LinkedIn messages literally written for you so you don't have to sweat. We're also here to give you unlimited interview practice so you're prepared to address every elephant in the room and knock selling yourself out of the park. Then we'll round out with helping you negotiate your salary so you land thousands more. Just so you know, recent clients have gotten $8,000 to $50,000 salary increases, even though they were totally non-traditional candidates. That's because we specialize in helping non-traditional career pivoters land jobs they're ecstatic to serve in. It takes work, but we're here to see you through until the end, when we're celebrating that day that you send me an email in all caps and you say, Kelsey, I got the job. Then you could be on the podcast. But I'll be here until then, keeping you accountable and encouraged by meeting with you literally until you land the job you want, even if that's up to 6 months from now within our program. Apply to join at thecalledcareer.com, and I'll see you next week here at Answer the Call. Bye for now.